I'm Andrea Lythgoe. My project is an online learning module developed in RISE and Storyline. It is intended for the employees of a medical clinic, designed to help them improve the way that they interact with and support their plus-size patient. There's a great need for a project like this. Almost 3/4 of adults in the US are either overweight or obese, and there are high levels of both implicit and explicit bias among medical professionals. This leads to plus-size patients fearing any interaction with the medical system. It means they get fewer screenings. It means they are diagnosed later with issues that they have, and that leads to higher medical costs, but most importantly, to increased morbidity and mortality among plus-size people. There are numerous articles in the public health literature discussing this approach, and in one of them, I found this quote from Janet Tomiyama and her fellow co-authors. "The most effective and ethical approaches should be aimed at changing the behaviors and attitudes of those who stigmatize." One phrase that kept coming up time and time again in the public health literature and in the materials that I found from the Obesity Society was this phrase: "See the person, not the pounds." And I tried to model that approach in the training by making this training as much as possible about real people. I chose to use the term plus size instead of obese or overweight because that term is less stigmatizing. I chose to use real photos of people who are plus sized, and throughout the training, you'll find real quotes from real people about their real experiences. I had 3 objectives here. The first objective is that by the midpoint of the course, the learners will be able to list 3 main areas for improvement and introspection, finding places where plus-sized patients might have trouble interacting with their medical system. In the training, I showed this using the story from the perspective of a patient. I helped to define the 3 categories in the debrief from the story and in discussing the cycle. I reinforced these 3 categories as I discussed the respect framework, and there is a knowledge check halfway through to see if they've been able to find those 3 categories. The second objective says that during the course, the learner will be able to complete a scenario where they apply what they've learned from the respect framework. So in the training, we outline that respect framework, and then they have the chance to apply that in the scenario, and they do get feedback within the scenario to reinforce it. The third objective looks at the attitudes and biases that the people in taking the training have. All of the scores will be averaged for the entire clinic. They will take the fat phobia scale short form at the beginning of the pretest and again 3 weeks after the close of the training window. And now I want to tell you a little bit more about this fat phobia scale. It was initially developed as a long form scale. It was later revised and validated as a short form. The short form scale that we use has 14 sets of paired descriptors, and the user chooses where they fall on a scale between each of the descriptors. I found this in the literature in a paper version. I used Storyline to convert it into an interactive self-scoring version. In designing this training, I used Merrill's principles to help the learners to both activate their prior knowledge and to learn more and have a very task-focused approach. So I have an opening story from the perspective of a plus-size patient. And as they go through the opening story, not only are they seeing things from the patient perspective, but they're activating their prior knowledge as they're evaluating how their patients are seeing things. I go through the 2 scales that are presented in the work of Susan Beatty-Spring, and we talk about the negative cycle and how poor treatment can pull people away from the healthcare system, and how respectful and sensitive care can create a positive cycle that creates more interaction between patients and the healthcare system. The respect framework that I talk about in the training was developed by Susan Beatty-Spring. It was initially intended only for use in a bariatric clinic and adapted it for a more general use for this training. In the RISE training, I introduced the acronym. and then later have a page for each letter of the acronym. And each letter of the acronym has a quote relating to that acronym, an explanation of what it means, and helpful tips, really small actionable steps that the learner can use to improve their interactions with plus-size people. There is a branching scenario in the training. I created that in Storyline. This scenario helps them to activate and apply their current learning as well as any prior learning. It is centered around a very common point for trouble in the relationship, which is when the patient first comes into the clinic and they need to weigh the patient or give the patient the option to be weighed. As they complete the scenario, the user can choose from several different options. The patient responses are actually randomized, so every time they complete the scenario, it might be a little bit different. There is a second step, so they have the initial scenario, the response options, a patient option, and then more response options from them. They can replay this scenario as many times as they want. Now, I just want to note that in this scenario, this is the only place in the training where I was unable to use actual photos of plus-size people. And that is because there aren't any scenario characters available of plus-sized people. At the end of the training, I drew from Schoen's reflective practice in order to have the learners spend some time reflecting on their past actions and learning and practicing that so that in the future they will be able to reflect in their actions in the moment. There are 3 questions that I ask them to spend time reflecting on, and at the end I give them a chance to set a goal. Thanks for watching. My contact information is on the screen right now, and the next few slides will have my references.